Well, good morning. I'm here about the same time you folks are, except it's on Friday morning, and enjoying what has become for me one of my favorite spaces in town. You know, love the family that runs this place, and they've been so welcoming. And I've got my little chai latte going here. So this is an experiment. You know, Marcus and I are telling you that, and this right here is an experiment. We started off last week filming at church, and that was some pretty raw stuff I was sharing. It was something that I was not aware of would be as powerful when I started saying it as it turned out to be. God really has touched my life in a profound way, and what I can report back to you a week later is that I'm working out what that means with God's help, and it's not easy. It's if I've lived out of fear in some of my areas of my life. I've lived out of because of the fear, I live out of control. I have to control things, and I get defensive, and those old habits are hard to break. So that's the process for it. But I'm starting every day praying that I not go backwards, but that I somehow go forwards. So that's where we are today as we start this movement one is what we're talking about today. And I got to tell you, my response to Rob Bell was like a breath of fresh air. I mean, this is like a guy that was asking the questions I ask. You know, I grew up in a church where you didn't ask questions. If you had doubts, keep them to yourself. It was dangerous to question anything. And what we believed was, well, you were tested on it. Your belief system, like exactly what does it mean to be born again? Jesus uses this great analogy of being born again with Nicodemus, and we had turned it into this rule so that, okay, you're born again. What time, what day, what moment did that happen? And if you couldn't cite a particular moment, it's like, I don't know, you know, I don't think you've been born again. And so we'd taken something that was a spring, the whole idea of being born again, made it into a brick. And that's the way I was raised. And so I never wanted to be in the ministry. I never wanted to be a pastor. I always wanted to be with people. I wanted to be in conversation with people. I'm actually trained as a hospice chaplain, because what attracted me to that whole profession of being a chaplain, particularly a hospice chaplain, is that when you're with someone who is dying, you're in the no bullshit zone. You're not being nice anymore. You're not talking about the weather. You're not talking about beliefs as if you were taking a test. I mean, it's real. It's the real questions of why is God doing this to me? Or is God doing this to me? Or what's the point of this? Or what's going to happen to me when I die? What's going to happen? You know, I remember a guy talking about the image he had that you're in a parade and you're having so much fun in the parade. And when you're sick and dying, you know that at some point you're not going to be in the parade anymore, and the parade's going to go down the street without you. And it's like, wow. I mean, that's really having some big conversations about God and life. And so that's what really attracted me to that. So I end up in church where we have all these don't talk rules. You can't talk about how you feel. You can't talk about your doubts. You can't talk about your moments of fear or terror. It's not a safe place. Now, one of the things that's happened at St. Andrew is that because I got struck down by sobriety in 1994, we had to come to some decisions as a leadership and as a church whether it was okay to have a pastor who was a recovering alcoholic. And if that was going to be okay. Somebody who had clearly had a breakdown in their lives, could we still have them in leadership? And there was some discussion about that. There was a board meeting in which I said to the board, there's something you need to know because you're going to find out. And that is, I'm going into the rooms of a 12-step group. And that I've had this breakdown, but for me, it's a God breakthrough. And that God willing, I will continue to live in sobriety. That God had touched me in a very special way. And there was a discussion around that of kind of going, okay, that's, we're about grace. And that really was the discussion. Do we talk about grace or are we really about grace? And you can be with people that talk about grace until somebody has a breakdown, and then there's no grace. I mean, it's been said in the church that if the people of God are the army of God, it's the one army in the world that shoots its own wounded. And so then I announced it to the congregation on Monday, Thursday, which is a Thursday before Good Friday, and said that this had happened to me. And people looked at each other and said, really, is this okay? And several people decided it was not okay and left. The vast majority said, no, this is what we're here for. We're here to be here for each other because we're on a journey. None of us have it right. This is something about that God is doing in us, and it has something to do with following Jesus. It's not about being perfect, but it's being on the road. That Jesus really is the way, the truth, and the life. And that we're trusting He is the way to the Father. That statement is true. And that this is not going to be about bricks. That we're going to be about our faith, and our community is going to be about the springs that Bell talks about. That we're going to bounce together, we're going to jump together, and we're not going to throw out the traditional beliefs of Christianity as if they're outdated or some kind of obsolete. We're not going to see them as bricks. We're going to see them as springs in the trampoline, and we're going to jump together. So that's been going on for the last 18 years. So I take that place of being a hospital chaplain that really resonates with real conversations. There are no bullshit zone. And put that with a community of grace where we're meant to be on a journey together and have a conversation. And then I pick up Velvet Elvis, which I had on my bookshelf for at least 2 years before I read it. Because somebody said I had to buy it, and I thought it was the dumbest title I'd ever seen in my life. Velvet Elvis. And then I read it. One of those occasions that sometimes happens to maybe some of you. You have a book, and it sits there, and all of a sudden you pick it up, and it's just the right time to pick it up. And so I picked it up and read it and go, this was like a breath of fresh air. This is like being in a stuffy room and somebody threw all the windows open. Because Bill comes with more questions than he does answers, and he invites us into an experience. He invites us onto a journey. And I think that's what Jesus is doing. And so part of what we're doing here at Picazo on Sunday mornings is figuring out different ways to get these conversations going on so that they can be real. And that this be a safe place where we can bring our doubts and our questions and our inconsistencies and admit that there are times when we're hypocrites, that we put on a show and it's not what's really going on with us, and be able to take those masks off and be real. And so I just want to thank you for being part of this conversation and for helping me venture in to a whole other dimension of what this means to be having a conversation about Jesus. So when I talk about this being a safe place, I really mean this being a safe place. And I understand that the church has not been a safe place. I grew up in a church that was not a safe place. I saw people, like I said, who had breakdowns and were absolutely ostracized from the community. And another guy who's a kind of a contemporary with Rob Bell is a guy named Don Miller. And Don Miller one time talked about it, something they did at Reed College, is that a bunch of his Christian friends went on the campus on this crazy weekend where they smoke everything, take shrooms and everything else, and get completely messed up. And these 4 Christians put a booth in the middle of the quad at Reed College, and they labeled it the confession booth. And so students and faculty would wander up to this booth over the weekend and go, confession? What are you talking about? And what Don and his friends said is, we're here to confess how the church has not been the church that Jesus wanted us to be. How we've judged people. How we've been about bricks and throwing bricks instead about being a safe place where people can come and find grace and love and forgiveness. Sure, change of life. I mean, we all know that there's areas in our lives where we would really want to change because we know that what we're doing is heading in the wrong direction. But how do you do that in a safe environment where you're not judged and condemned and where you're encouraged? And so Don Miller was just basically saying to all these non-Christian folks, we apologize. As a church, we apologize. And so that's why I want to be a part of things like this, to say, how do we create space for people, especially people who have been damaged by the church, who church is not a safe place. St. Andrew isn't even a safe place. How do we create a space to have the God conversation and be on a journey together about loving God and loving neighbor, and do that in a place where we can have some good coffee and some good food. So God bless, and we'll see you next Sunday.